Thank you, Dan. Thank you, University of Hong Kong, for the invitation, Tin Kai Ping Foundation for their support, Northwest Normal University for your support and hospitality. Greetings, everyone. We've heard a lot about population, so I'm going to repeat a couple of those points. I want you to think globally and about what it means. So, internationally, across our little planet that Mike was talking about, the majority of the population live in cities, as Michael said. That's happened in the European world a while ago, more recently when we include in China in that study. And in my country, Australia, about 2/3 of our people live in capital cities or within 50 kilometres of the coast, very concentrated. So we know that. I want you to be thinking, though, what does this mean for how we understand and interact with the world? We've heard about the environmental side, the sustainability side, but what do we value in education? What is considered a normal education, a normal curriculum, a normal classroom environment? What do we think the standards or the averages or the benchmarks of good achievement are? And also, what do we lose in that process? If everyone lives in the city, the way we do things in the city becomes seen as normal. Just by sheer weight of numbers, the averages and the benchmarks statistically will skew to the city. So even the way that we measure and compare gets skewed and changed. We don't think about this. What we think is important knowledge is knowledge from the cities. But we lose culture, we lose other forms of knowledge, we lose culture and tradition. That's a curriculum and knowledge question. If I compare our two countries, you can see we too have very dense population in a couple of locations and very little people elsewhere. There might be a very big desert in the middle as well of mine. But you have one up north, so. But very concentrated. The research that I will share later is from a lot of these areas where there are no yellow dots. So, globally we have heard that rural areas are suffering. Mike went through some dimensions, so I won't dwell too much. But I will focus on the idea of a wicked problem. So a wicked problem is one that persists, and every attempt to change it doesn't work. It's too complex, too interconnected. So aging, healthcare, economic activity, education, getting doctors, nurses, teachers, these are all interconnected. We hear a lot about schools and teachers, but we need the regional economy. If we don't grow the regional economy, we won't have doctors. We don't have doctors, we won't have people moving to the community. It's a whole interconnected cycle. But when Mike showed the primary school increase in leaving, etc., etc., we know this happens. We have the literacy level that gets challenged. We have retention decreases. We have completion decreases. Less matriculation to university. But again, let's not just constantly frame it as the normal deficit. That's based on an assumption of a certain type of school and a certain type of outcome. And that's where we want to be thinking. All right. So what is a new way of thinking? I think the idea of rural regional sustainability is one that we can be working with. We've heard from previous speakers about looking after the land, the stewardship of the land, maintenance of the environment to both provide our oxygen, our water, food and food production, forestry. They are all important parts of how we understand sustainability. But sustainability has multiple dimensions. It has the environmental, but it has the economic, and it has the social and cultural. And those things all need to work together. If we don't have the environmental side sorted, then the towns and communities can't be supported. If we don't have the social and cultural side supported, then we lose the people that want to live and engage with that place, but also who understand the environment and the way it operates. So rural regional sustainability is a concept that colleagues have written about in terms of culture and knowledge. Okay. I'll leave the environmental side because that's been covered already. So how do we, through education, teach the cultures, values, knowledges, and make those meaningful in school through the school curriculum? How do we not learn to leave, as Mike has written? And this is a question of the knowledge that underpins what we learn in schools. A lot of our sciences are based on fossil fuel extraction and carbon economies. What are the sciences that we need to maintain and restore and regenerate those environments? What are the literacies that we learn and read in schools that value forms of literacies in rural communities and the way of understanding space, even mathematical notions of spatial reasoning, have dimensions? Okay. If you didn't know, Mike's written about rural literacy quite a lot. Different forms of literacies that rural communities and rural people engage with. The same with mathematics. When we think of things in spatial reasoning senses, rural people don't navigate, they wayfind. You go over the hill, around the corner, over the river. Okay? But these are concepts of understanding space. But they're not the key concepts in the curriculum. Literacy in the curriculum is a very urban-centric notion. We looked in the Australian curriculum, which makes sustainability mandatory. I think 93% of the connections were all about the environment. So they don't even use the very definition of sustainability in the curriculum. So there are tools there. This then comes in how we understand the very definition of the places we're talking about. We can't talk about rural places. We can't look at issues of educational achievement, economic growth, if we don't define where they are. We use this measure, which I won't go into in great detail, but it basically shows how close you are to a town of about 250,000 people in Australian sense. So rural is defined statistically as proximity to a large town which has other services. Then all our analysis of education, all our analysis of health is based on this proximity notion. However, what it doesn't do is get engaged with the social and the cultural. Culturally, rural people identify through their literature, their music, their traditions, their histories, as having a distinct identity, a distinct rural identity. So that is part of the definition of rurality, which isn't in policy. Geographically, we can talk about land use. Okay, agricultural land, farming land, a bit like Mike mentioned. So as we think about how we define the very phenomena, we need to think about, well, what basis are we using? Because that has implications for our research. If we just use statistics, like this sort of thing, all we can do is compare. But the numbers are such that they will never compare equally, because more people are living in the city, right? So when we use in education research, statistics is the number one methodology, but it is also flawed when it comes to looking at rural education because of that skew. We can look at the cultural definitions and how people make sense and meaning of their locations. So in the last presentation, how the rural students and communities understand and value that change, that move from their local country school to the town. And we can look at it geographically. Space. How do we understand the spaces, and how does the space influence us? It means with the model on the right, my colleagues from Australia, we're basically arguing when we think about education policy, we don't just need to think about one definition. We need to think about the interconnection between the economy and the industry, the demography and the population, the geography and the environment. So if it is a very good farming land, it'll have good soil, nice rainfall, more people can live there because it can produce more and support more people, and there'll be more industries there based around agriculture. As you get into drier, harsher, other areas, the geographic landscape will change how many people can live there and be supported, etc. But those things are all interacted. And what it means in rural education research is if I'm looking at an approach in one community where the environment is very good farming land, good production, creates a lot of agricultural wealth, it's rural, but it's a very different dynamic than a farming or a community where it is very dry, very large farms, very small population, very hot. Okay? They have a very different dynamic. And we can do that again and again and again. So we can't easily get to universal truth about phenomena because they're so mediated by the interactions of these elements. It's good coming after Mike because I can refer to him all the time. Mike talked about the need for a rural theory. So we've been trying to think about a rural theory with this book that we edited called Ruraling Education Research. And it's trying to think that the education site, or the edu state, so to speak, it's not just one thing, it's multiples drawing on that dynamic that I referred to earlier. And that means we need to think about different ways of engaging with theory and different research methods and bringing those together in a productive way. And then that influences practice. So the way we prepare teachers can't be the one way for everything. It needs to be to understand that interaction so they can then contextualize their practice and make it meaningful for that place. We invented the word ruraling because we could, to try to say that, well, we need to reframe the metrocentricity and metronormativity of education research. We go to our education conferences and everyone tells us this is the way you should do it, but they just think the city, the city, the city. So we need to get them thinking, well, let's think about it in a rural sense. So let's rural education research. Because if every education researcher is thinking from a rural perspective, then it will work for our kids in our communities. And if it doesn't work for our kids and communities, then it's unjust. We need to be reframing the framework. And I think this is where it's so exciting to be back here. I think I met Dan Wang here in 2017, 2018, I think. And learning over the years about rural China, learning, for instance, the work of Fei Xiaotong. It's like there is so much generative work and such a focus on rural research that we can all learn from to understand this phenomena globally, to try to think about that wicked problem in new ways, learning from each other, rather than it just being sort of sharing some previously examples. So how do we build those, I guess? So I'm moving into a knowledge question here. So these are some theoretical tools. I'm really interested in space. Space produces the experiences that we have. It produces the knowledges that we develop in our interaction as we move through the Earth. It also exercises a form of power. The key things to think about with space, and drawing from like Soja, for instance, is that there are always embedded injustices. Previous speaker looked at changes in funding over time. So there's an issue about the justice of funding and how it is distributed, just by virtue of location. But space is produced. It's produced in our interaction with it. If I think of a rural community, or I talk to someone about a rural community, they've probably never been anywhere rural, but they imagine what it's like. They've read about it in the news, they've seen it on TV shows, they've maybe seen some artwork. They had this imagined view. When they go there, it's a very different experience because they're suddenly immersed in it. So it's influencing them by them being in that location. But that experience is also going to be different to the person who is from that community. Their experience of place is based on their life, their history, intergenerational forms of knowledge. So what we get is an idea that, you know, these knowledges, these experiences are produced. When we talk about how to manage land, in the sense that what Mike was talking about, the people who have lived there for generations know how to manage the land. They don't need someone coming in from outside to tell them how to do that. We need to listen. But then we get this power dynamic. So we get the rural schools are underperforming, rural schools are a problem, rural communities are in decline. Okay? So this is a constant power discourse that's going on. Constantly marginalizing, making it a problem to be fixed rather than something to be valued. Now, they're three dead European theorists. The exciting work is in Southern theory notions. This is drawing on ideas that there are theories from around the world that are not engaged with in research all that much. Partly because they are from the global south, and I include all of the rural in the global south. They include the work coming from China. They include the work coming from Brazil, which is really exciting. The work from South Africa, Ghana, just to mention a few places. Okay. Now, the problem becomes in the production of academic knowledge, in that they are produced in languages other than English, and then the publishing process and how we access knowledge becomes an issue. So we'll get to those issues. But I just like to throw this one in because we get a sense of geographic narcissism. People who are making decisions or doing the work kind of think that the urban world is the center of the universe. But the urban world is the center of a lot of people's individual universes, but it's certainly not the center of the earth. But what it means is, and we've used these phrases already, we end up with policy that has a metronormative metrocentric notion. It means policies based on the interests, understanding, and needs of the metropolitan environment. But what is the metropolitan environment? So this then comes to the question of curriculum. So the question, I guess, is, in national systems, we have an idea of the curriculum. Oops, you do. Did I just break it? I broke it. Oh, good. Move away from the thing on the floor. It's Mike's fault for walking around. So, I guess when we have a national curriculum, it is one decision. We take what are the things that we think are important about our national history that children need to know, and we put it in a document. What are the important science insights that we think children need to know? We put it in a document. And then no matter where children are, they learn about that document. The question, though, is that relevant, or is that acceptable for rural kids? When we have one notion, all we can ever do is try to make sure that everyone gets to a certain level within it. But if that knowledge is from somewhere else, then they're mastering knowledge of another place, not of their own. Does it serve the needs of those rural communities? So if local economic growth is based on local production, local forms of industry, is the education system helping that? Are they learning the skills that they need to develop that? Does the standard national curriculum achieve that? And what about rural knowledge? What about the knowledges rural people have? We can't assume, as much education policy does, that there is nothing to be known or understood from here, because that's just not true. There are deep knowledges. And what industries? What industries will be used in the future and will develop in the future in these rural regions? And if so, what are the skills that children need and teachers need to be teaching them? Okay. So the two questions so far. One is, what are the assumptions about what is valued in education if everyone's experience is urban? And then narrowing that question down, what is the knowledge that we think is important and meaningful in rural schools compared to the knowledge that is in the education system nationally or internationally, if we look at the OECD, the World Bank and so forth, with certain notions of testing and measurement. So let's think about this. To recap, let's think about this. We've got the idea of the metropole. Now, what is the metropole? Okay. Why do we have a global south? The notion of the metropole is like, it's a concept of the large global city that is the center of power and knowledge production. Okay. That's the metropole. It's typically represented in English language nations. It's typically sort of represented as London, Berlin, New York, Los Angeles. Okay? These are seen as being the center of activity, the center of knowledge, the center of power in those notions. And they exercise a really strong influence. And they're implicated in the history of academic disciplines. Okay? These are where the universities that became the powerful custodians of the knowledge that we then codify in the curriculum were based. If you look at the literature, the science, the mathematics, etc., etc., these are all be traced from the early European universities of the last 1,000 or so years. Okay? And they've gone to other countries that are the non-English speaking countries. Okay? You know very well in China, the need to master both the English gives opportunities, but also the academic disciplines and the subjects are still structured in the same way as those global metropole institutions. That's a problem for two reasons. One, they're urban-based, okay? And they're based on a form of abstract knowledge. Those were about studying the subject or studying the discipline, not using or applying them. We got away from that. Okay? It became general principle based and the study of that as an object in an abstract form, and not the use of that knowledge. And the use of knowledge got marginalized. That's situated, that's subjective, that's practice. They are being positioned as lower order things. But we as humans created that. It's not natural. So as we have modernity, and modernity being the move to the city, you know, and even rurality, studying rural areas, we do that because of the change. You know, we don't do it because we're actually looking at what is the basis of knowledge in those contexts. And here we're thinking, what does that mean for curriculum? And just to throw in another bit of European theory, this goes back to Durkheim. You know, it goes back a couple of hundred years now, right? But this idea that, well, there's this sort of communal and associational society notion. But as communities started to live in larger groups, we needed other ways to relate. So we had other forms of knowledge abstraction, knowledge on the side. You could have contracts. You could have other ways of relating to people. It wasn't just like, you know, who do you know, how long have you known them, where have you been, etc. And all our research about knowledge went down that path. It went down the abstract path. But the whole thing of, you know, communal knowledge, well, yes, if you go to a rural school or a rural town, it's always a case of who do you know, how long have you been there, who's your family, what do they do, okay? So there's a communal connection, which is how people connect. But that intellectual tradition got left and didn't get evolved. We just got stuck in the cities studying the objects of knowledge. And that's when I think of even the Fei Xiaotong's work there, you know, and that notion of the national character coming from that rural environment. But even Fei Xiaotong went and studied in France. Okay? But there's still that national myth. But there's a form of connection there that still exists beyond cultures. So what does it mean when we bring that together? Spatial justice, drawing on the notion of Soja, is this idea that, you know, we have historical, economic and spatial dimensions to justice. Historically, we can say that these groups have been left out or marginalized, or these are the changes that have happened over time. Okay, and we've seen some of those. Economic justice, we can say these people have less resources, less opportunities or less inputs. Okay. So with the first one, we can go, right, we can redress that with some policy changes. With the second one, we can say we can redistribute some resources. We can put some more resourcing in those schools. We can put some more teachers in those schools. But the spatial bit, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the idea that, you know, these environments that are more open, more land-based, are not the sort of highly populated, dense, closed urban environments? Well, there's a form of justice there as well, in recognizing that as being, you know, valuable and meaningful. So it's just, there's more than just overcoming economic inequities. There's recognizing that the way that those are produced and understood in space is meaningful. and important and valuable. Epistemic justice is the idea that people know things differently. If I take a city kid and ask them, how do you look after a lamb? How do you prepare meat? Where does milk come from? They probably won't know the answer. But a rural kid knows the answer to those things and can tell you. So they have knowledge. So how do we include that? But the Metropole doesn't enable it. The way of knowing from a rural person who can tell you how to travel somewhere, how things operate, how things are applied in practice is not included. So let me bring the theory into practice. Everyone's interested in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. We have a problem in our rural schools, and we were asked to look into why weren't rural students studying science and mathematics? Because, to get ahead, you must study science and mathematics. But the rural kids were not choosing it. So we looked at, we did focus groups across the country, big survey across the country. We talked to students, teachers, and local industries. And as you can see, only two circles of influence overlap. The students would usually say to us, these are the ones that wanted to stay and live locally. Away from the floor. These are the ones who wanted to stay and live locally. That I don't need to study physics or biology or mathematics because I'm going to live here. I want to stay here in this place. And those subjects don't matter to me or aren't useful for my future. Now, that is plainly wrong because those subjects are the basis of the rural industries. And rural industries are the future industries in Australia at least, probably in China. Okay? Increasing agricultural production and output is based on technological innovations. What was happening was those kids had never seen science and mathematics used in a rural sense. And their teachers over here had never seen that either. These teachers were trained in the study of mathematics and science in the textbooks, etc. And they could talk to the students that were going to go off to university and go somewhere else. But these kids that understood the local communities, understood local industries, have worked on farms in forestry, they had no way of communicating because they didn't understand science in the regional economy. And the local industries were equally problematic. So you have these industry organisations that want to innovate, but they can't find people that understand the industry enough to actually do the rural industry innovation because they don't understand them in practice. This is a curriculum problem because we don't have representations in the curriculum and even the teachers can't make those connections. I'll be very quick. So we have, this is just a lot of small schools in Australia. This is one state where I do a lot of work. A lot of small schools with 100 or fewer kids. 22.3% of schools, 2.4% of students. So a lot of schools, small students. And they often get closed. But these schools are central to the community. They're the heart of the community, right? The local school is the local identity. People went to that school for generations. It's really important. If we're going to innovate and grow the future, these places matter. So a sense of community, etc. But we can see the numbers are declining. So they're being closed. You have the same issue here. Other countries do. At least 50 small schools in the last 12 years have closed. So there's a big decline in small schools. This gets to the problem that Mike was mentioning about stewardship. If the schools close, people leave. If people leave, who looks after the land? But also, who is there to work in the industries and grow those industries for the future of the rural economy if those communities leave? So, a couple of examples. That's just a map of where the schools are and how close people are and things, so don't worry about that. This is one little lovely school where I spend a lot of time. I spent the last 4 years in schools, in a lot of research. 200 kilometres to the nearest town on a tarred road. All the rest are dirt roads. And if it rains, you're not getting on them. We call it a food desert. There's no shop in town. And this school has 28 children from kindergarten to year 12. So this school, this is a school district. This school is here, right? That's the nearest shop all the way down there, and you can't get anywhere else. So in all those areas, all those blue dots are where people live. In all those areas, there's very little access to food, right? Bit of a problem. You need food, right? They can kill a sheep and eat meat, but you can't just eat meat. So this school, 6 years ago, developed this garden program. So we have a massive vegetable garden. We have aquaponics for fertilizer and fish. We have the little tuckers over here preparing their produce and selling it in a stall. In Australia, when you retire, it's good to get a caravan and drive around the countryside. This is a lot stop and buy fresh food because they can't buy it themselves because there's no shops. The school, through doing this as part of their curriculum, has integrated it in everything. They study it in science, so they make better products. They do it in mathematics, inputs, outputs, cost, etc. They write about it in advertising, etc. in English. And it's not just tokenistic. It's genuinely integrated. The children now grow vegetables at home. It's a very poor community. The health has improved dramatically. And if we wanted to talk standardized test results, because they actually understand the context of doing the mathematics and the science, their standardized results have gone up and more kids have stayed on in school to study science and agriculture. Huge success. As you can see, reasonably dry area, red soil. Another example. In science, in the textbook, in the curriculum, they have to study current, flow, resistance, and forces. So current, flow, resistance, and forces. Now, for some reason, every science textbook puts those in this context of electricity. In this community, different school, a lot of the children live on generators. They pump water or carry water from the river. Very few stay on past year 10. So they just changed it. They study current, flow, resistance, forces by looking at their local river. The children can tell you so much. When the snow melts, where to fish, where not to fish, where not to swim. There were big bushfires here, so they know about pumping and pressure and hoses. They have such a deep, deep knowledge of the environment and of science in that environment. It's just when they go and do the test, they get a picture of an electricity grid, not of a river. What if we did the city kids and gave them a river? Would they know the answers? But it's still current, flow, force, and resistance, right? So there's a shift there. One more. And this last example Again, a science example. Thinking back to the Gemeinschaft, Gemeinschaft, the communal associational thing. This school took their science curriculum, years 9 and 10, upper high school, and instead of studying, astrophysics or whatever, they reorganized the curriculum. Because usually you study an element of science, and there's a little bit of what jobs could you have there. What this school did is they looked around town and said, right, what jobs do people do in town that need science degrees? Because in a rural community, people associate socially. So everyone knows the chemist. Everyone knows the engineer. Everyone knows the medical physics person. When you have a baby, you have the scan, or you break an arm and they scan it. Right? So everyone knows Tracy down at the medical service. So rather than talk about, physics, they talk about last time you had a broken arm and you saw Tracy, what does she do? Because everyone knows that. They have a connection. And they build out. They've organized the whole curriculum now around this sort of notion in science and done it across the board. I can tell you the level of engagement from the students is huge. These children that were not going on to 11 and 12, not that they should, are staying and studying science. Because they can see now that these subjects are meaningful for them and the future of their community that they want to stay in. So, what I've wanted to try to say today is we have this assumption about the city as being the normal experience. I want you to think in the future about that in terms of what does that mean for the knowledge that we value in school and the way we organize curriculum in schools. And what does that tell us about what justice is, ideas of spatial justice, and how we rethink those? And I hope by giving you 3 quick examples there of that theory, you can see that it is possible for schools to rethink the subjects which have that metropolitan bias inherent in them in the way we structure them. It takes creative work, takes hard work, but it also asks really important questions about the nature of the very knowledge that we're valuing. And what we end up with is this idea of rural regional sustainability, both as an environmental focus, but as maintaining the future of these places, these knowledges, for the little spinning rock that we all share, and the future of our societies. And you find innovation in schools that are doing this sort of great work. Thank you.